Welcome back to the Bluechip Breakdown, Vols fans. I'm your host, Bull, and we got a lot to cover in today's video. We'll be talking about that transfer portal for the football team, for the men's and women's basketball teams. We'll be talking about softball, and we'll be talking about baseball. At the end, I want to talk about 7 teams that I've been watching spring games of and what my thoughts are, okay? And I believe 3 of those teams are actually on our schedule. I'll just kind of talk about what Tennessee needs to do to win those games, what my expectations are, just based off of their spring games at this point. But before we get into it, please do us a really big favor. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. All right, so we're going to start off with our football team and that transfer portal. We all know that Elijah Herring was the first and only player at the time that we're doing this video to say that they want to enter into the portal. Now, he hasn't done it officially, so a lot of the insiders are kind of speculating that he may end up sticking around with his younger brother, Caleb Herring. So we're also pretty concerned about Caleb maybe following his brother outside of the SEC to go and play football. But I think that this makes the most sense for really both of them. Stay inside of the SEC with the team that you already know. And I really feel like the linebackers struggled last season, not so much because of their play. We know that Aaron Beasley was kind of banged up, but Elijah Herring just getting so many reps just looked like he didn't really know what to do. And I put that a lot on Coach BJ. It looks like Coach Inge has our linebackers, up to this point, playing a lot better. Just the, basic fundamental stuff. It looks a lot better. And that's across the entire board. So I would say that Herring is a guy, at 6'3", almost 240 pounds, could be very impressive at the linebacker spot up under Coach Inge. Also sounds like Coach Inge has been working on him since last winter to get him to stick around with this team. So we'll see what happens with that as time continues to pass by. I know that Elijah doesn't have a very long window to get his name actually, officially into the portal. So we should hear something very concrete within the next few days. Now, who else could maybe leave this team? It sounds like, okay, just listening to what Austin Price is saying, we know about those tea leaves and things like that. Sounds like maybe it could end up being a cornerback. And to me, all signs are kind of pointing towards Jordan Matthews. Now, that's just pure speculation on my part. We don't know who's going to enter in. If anyone else is going to enter in, I'll be willing to bet that we'll probably lose 2 to 3, maybe more players or something like that. But I just don't feel like it's going to be any starting caliber guys. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Hopefully Jordan Matthews does stick around. We kind of talked about that in the film breakdown that I kind of, released some of that to everybody, okay, for y'all to see. I believe that there was a clip or 2 of Jordan Matthews in it, but if it wasn't, then please do consider becoming a member and you can kind of see where we're breaking down Jordan Matthews' game. But he looks really good in the shorter coverages. If he can just find a way to stay on top of the routes and also be able to maintain, breaking up on those short routes, then I feel like he could be a great piece for this team heading into the 2024 season. But we all know that running back is really the position that we're watching very closely as far as, are we going to have any players leave? And are we going out to target anyone? A lot of people have been talking about Damian Martinez. That's the running back that entered the portal from Oregon State. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be coming up on a visit. Okay, it was kind of rumored early on that he would be, but it sounds like that was more for him just to try to get some leverage as far as NIL and things like that goes. He was making $400,000 back at Oregon State, so he's looking for more money. I just don't see any, realistic world where we're going to be paying that type of money for a, transfer running back into a room that's already pretty deep, right? We're just a little bit, I would say, more concerned about the youth inside of that room. But if we stay relatively healthy, then we're going to be fine, especially because Cam Seldon will be back around the midway point through this season. So I just don't see that being a realistic option. Now, one of the players that we did talk about in the previous video is Penny Boone. That's the running back from Louisville. And, he did get to play up under Coach Sims. He's about 6'2", 235 pounds. I think that makes sense. And it looks like, as far as Marshall Levinson from over there at Rivals tweeted out the other day, Tennessee is a team that has already expressed some interest amongst a whole long list of other teams. So could he be a guy that Tennessee could bring in? To me, he would make the most sense. He's an older guy, probably is not, going to be, asking for too much money. But looking at that list, I mean, maybe he does. We don't know. Obviously, it's going to have to be a perfect situation for us to get a running back from the portal. I do still think that it's pretty necessary. But I would hope really that the staff is out there trying to find some smaller, like lower classification guys, with some bigger bodies that are veterans like we talked about before, because that's really what this team needs. So we'll keep a close eye on that, and we'll keep y'all up to date as more news comes across our desk. All right, so on to transfer portal news for the basketball team. Darlin Stone Dubar did commit to our Volunteers. He's listed at 6'8" right here, but on his visit, he came in at about 6'6". And that's okay because he's going to end up being that wing / small forward guy for us. We're seeing that he came in at, 17.8 points per game last season, shooting at almost 54% from the field and about 40% from three. This is exactly what we needed. 6.8 rebounds, 1.4 assists to go along with 1.2 steals per game and almost a block per game. He's going to kind of be that Josiah Jordan James for this team. So that's a really big pickup for our Volunteers. And the next player is Igor Milichik. He is a power forward from Charlotte. Now he's listed at 6'10", 225 pounds. Last season, he averaged 12.8 points per game, shooting at about 48, almost 49%, okay, 8.5 rebounds. And this is a player that we are bringing in to maybe be a center for us, but he could also be a forward. Now, he does shoot well from the field. Okay, he can step out and shoot that three ball as well. It sounds like his visit went really well with our Volunteers and the entire staff. So he's got another visit lined up with Baylor. We'll see how that whole thing goes. And he also visited Nebraska earlier in the week. Next player is going to be Cade Tyson. He's a 6'7" guard from Belmont. 16.2 points per game, shooting almost 50% from the field and about 44% from three. He's also got 5.9 rebounds per game, 1.6 assists. I think he's exactly what we need on this team. He's a pure scorer. Okay, he can be a spot-up guy, but he can also kind of create his own shot. I mean, it would be beautiful if we could add him to our roster, but he is from North Carolina, and he's going to be visiting North Carolina this weekend. That's where a lot of the experts are saying he's going to end up going, so we'll see what happens after this visit coming up this weekend. All right, and the last player that we'll be talking about for the men's basketball transfer portal is going to be Roddy Gale Jr. He's a 6'4" guard from Ohio State. He averaged 13.5 points per game, shot about 45% from the field, and he only shot 28% from three last season, but he's shooting 33% for his career. Now, this is a player that we're hoping that we can get up on a visit, but a lot of teams, are coveting him at this point, and it sounds like he's already got some visits set up with Michigan and Georgia of all teams. Now, this does kind of rub me wrong because number one, okay, why would you be going to Michigan from Ohio State to visit them? That's a little bit weird for me. And then also, why in the world would you be trying to go visit Georgia if you're a basketball player? That's kind of a head scratcher, but I will say that he is a very good player. He's more of a slasher. And if he can be consistent from 3 points, then he will be a great addition to this team. And now let's talk about our Lady Vols in the transfer portal. Okay, so this is the only player that we'll be talking about for their team, even though there are some other names that are out there rumored that maybe we're targeting, but I don't want to put that out there just yet. But we are targeting Lai-82 King, and I hope that I'm pronouncing her name right. This is going to be her last year of eligibility. She's a 6'4", and she was all ACC last year from Pitt, averaging 18.7 points per game, shooting 52% from the field, 10 rebounds, 1.8 assists, and she does not shoot the three ball at all. But I love the way that she runs the floor. You can tell that she's a good athlete, and I think that she will be a great piece for that new style of play that we're going to be having in 2024. All right, so sticking with our Lady Vols, let's talk about Coach Kim Caldwell's new hires to her staff. And, we talked before about just letting her cook, letting her go out and identify what we need to get back to being a, perennial championship caliber team. I think that she's done that. She brought two coaches with her from Marshall, and then she went out and got two SEC coaches, two coaches that know the South very well, and they're great recruiters. So the first coach is going to be Roman Tubner. Now, he's coming from Alabama. Again, he's going to be one of the ace recruiters, and he knows the South very well. I think that was a genius move. He's coached for a long time. And let's also talk about Gabe Lazo, who's coming from Mississippi State. Now, he was actually the associate head coach at Mississippi State, I believe this last season, or maybe coming into this 2024 season. But I think that that's really big to go out and get a coach of that caliber that, again, is, knows the South well, okay, is from the SEC and can recruit his butt off. So that was a really big addition. Next coach, speaking of assistant and associate head coaches, is Jenna Burdett, who was Coach Kim Caldwell's assistant head coach back at Marshall. That's, obviously really big just for the continuity of everything. And then we've also got Angel Reiser, who was also part of that Marshall staff. And she's a younger coach, but I think that it's important to kind of have those young guns, so to speak, on your staff. They can kind of, maybe relate to the players on a closer level, but it sounds like she was coaching guards primarily at Marshall. That's going to be obviously a really big position for this team moving forward. So I love what Coach Kim Caldwell has done just in the, new additions to our staff. And I think that she's on a great track. I know that it's probably like a whirlwind for her. You see her everywhere. I mean, she's got an interview with all these people, a whole lot of photo ops and things like that, but she's been handling it very gracefully. And, I'm very proud of that hire. I think that already it looks like a home run hire for us. Now on to our Lady Vols softball team. We're coming off of a series win versus Mississippi State, where we lost the first game 1-9, won the second one 6-1, third game 7-3, and we've got LSU coming up on Friday. Our Lady Vols team is currently ranked number 4 nationally, just like our men's baseball team. So you always love to see that. And down here, okay, we've got a pretty tough stretch until we get into our SEC tournament, which starts May the 7th, but I think that our Lady Vols are in a really good position to finish strong, and I think that we could make some noise in the SEC and in the World Series tournaments. All right, and on to our men's baseball team. We just came off of a 20-5 victory versus Bellarmine, where Blake Burke hit our 10th Grand Slam of the season, and we're chasing that NCAA record of 14. I think that we're going to end up crushing that, but we've got a really big series coming up versus Kentucky. They're ranked number 3. Like we talked about, we're ranked number 4. If we can win this one, I really, really like where, we're going to be sitting at heading into our SEC tournament, which does not come all the way down here until May the 21st. So this season, is going to go on a little bit longer than the Lady Vol season will. But hopefully, I think that both of these teams can push for a national title. And now for the last segment of the day, I'm going to be talking about the 7 spring games that I watched. 4 of those teams are actually on our schedule, so we'll start with those. NC State, number 1, okay? Whenever you are looking at these teams, what I'm looking for anyway is the front 7 play. I would say that Tennessee's front 7 versus NC State's is night and day. It's not even close. But what I do like about NC State is their offensive scheme. They've got a transfer quarterback in Grayson McCall. I think that he might be from Charlotte, something like that. But he runs that offense well, okay? He looks very comfortable doing it. He's mobile, okay? He's a guy that they will, make some runs for. He's also a guy that can kind of extend some plays with his legs. I saw a lot of rollouts, okay? So we're going to get half of the field several times on defense. They're going to try to do some things to offset our pass rush, and they may have some success with that. This is a game that we're going to want to get a pass rush up the middle and maybe blitz, right? We need to be very opportunistic with our blitzes to, really run away with this one. But I would say that their defense, it looks very porous. They've got that odd man defensive line. Okay. So usually, it's like a 3-3-5 or something like that they run. We should be able to run all over them. This is a game that I think that Tennessee rushes for over, 250, maybe even 300 yards, all depending on what our running backs do. But yeah, this should, give our young guys a ton of confidence heading into the rest of the season early on. So I know a lot of people were kind of concerned about NC State, but I would say that Tennessee should end up winning this game by, 4 touchdowns or more if they really want to. I think that Nico puts up a bunch of points in this one as well. It's just not, a whole lot of front 7 talent. I don't see how they can stop our offense. We may kind of struggle just a taste early on trying to figure out what they're going to be doing on offense. But once we get that figured out, I think that we'll be extremely dominant versus what their scheme is and versus the level of talent that they have. So no concerns for me, in regards to NC State. Now, the next team is Florida, and Graham Mertz just looks like how he always has. Okay, their offensive scheme looks like it always has. I really like DJ Lagway. I don't know how much he's going to play this season. It sounds like he's going to have some packages every single week. To me, he's the, better quarterback over Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz is a lot more of a game manager. He's not going to win you any games, but he also might not lose you any ball games. I kind of feel like if they want to, take that next step forward and win more games than a lot of people think that they will this season, then DJ Lagway might be the way to go if he can operate the offense at a high clip. Now, he is a true freshman, so that might not happen. But I would say this, as far as their fronts, it looks pretty, looks about the same as it did last season, right? I think that the offensive line may look a little bit better. It's kind of hard to tell because they've lost so much talent and they're, going up against their own players. So how much of, the offensive line may be looking a little bit better than it did last season? How much of that is maybe the pass rush isn't as good? I think they've got some really good players out there at the skill positions that we'll have to, make sure that we keep bottled up. But I would say that for the most part, now we do struggle playing up against Florida for whatever reason. But, we're so much better than them this season. I would say that the gap is larger this year than it was last year as far as how much better we are than them, because we did feel like we were a lot better than Florida last year. But we know that Cooper Mays didn't play. We had to go down to the swamp, whatever voodoo they have on us down there that keeps us from being able to win those games. I just don't see them beating us this season. I think that Tennessee can win this game by, I'm going to say maybe 17 points, okay, just because it's Florida. If it wasn't Florida, but it was this exact same roster, exact same coaching staff with a different logo on their helmet, I would say that Tennessee could win this one by, maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns. I think that we are that much better than them. Where they kind of hurt us at last season was attacking our linebacking core. If we play as well as I think that we will, if we improve there as much as I think that we will this season, then, I mean, they're not going to be able to do that. That was the only way that they could have any sort of offensive prowess, was just attacking our linebackers over and over and over again. That won't happen this year. Just as far as I'm concerned, okay, it's very, very early on, but just giving y'all my thoughts, I think that Tennessee is a lot better than Florida. That's another team that I'm not too concerned about on our schedule. Next team is going to be Alabama. So they look completely different. I mean, it's not anywhere near what we saw from them last season. Their offense looks very explosive. I think that our game versus them could maybe end up getting into a shootout just because their defense, I mean, they didn't look like they was even playing defense. You know what I mean? It's hard to tell, is the offense just that good, or did the defense take that many steps backwards without Nick Saban out there coaching them up? And it looks like they did. Their schemes and stuff doesn't really look the same. I mean, nothing like that pop, that burst, that effort that they used to play with, that edge. I don't see it. I mean, not on defense anyway. Now, the offense, again, they look really good. I think that their running backs look explosive. They look, like they're going to be catching the football out of the backfield. It looks like they will be utilized a lot more than Coach Kalen DeBoer used them at Washington. So we'll see. I mean, that's obviously, for him and for Alabama fans, coming into the SEC, you better be able to run that football at a pretty high clip. And I think that they can. Their quarterback, Milroe, I think that he looks good operating in that offense. I mean, threw some great passes. The wide receivers look really good. Doesn't like they're going to be doing too much of a hurry up type of a deal like Tennessee does. It is, from a, like scheme perspective, the same air raid type of a thing that Tennessee does. I think there's some different wrinkles with ours. I think we spread the field out even more with our wide receivers and even with the offensive line splits. But yeah, I think that this one versus Alabama could end up being a shootout up in Knoxville. We'll see. If our defense can find a way to figure out what they do, and you would think that Coach Heupel would, maybe kind of tell Coach Banks, hey, this is what y'all need to do to stop their offense. But how much of his trade secrets does he want to try to give away? That's going to be interesting. I think that, being that it's going to be versus Alabama, he probably is going to be giving that away to Coach Banks. And I feel like our defense will be able to shine. I think that we'll be able to get pressure on Milroe. Their offensive line looks pretty good, but does that scheme really fit their size? Because a lot of those guys are huge, right? Maybe it does. I mean, I don't know. I think that maybe if we can get pressure up the middle, that's the way that I think that you attack these air raid offenses, is if you can get that pressure, from B to B gap, then it's going to be very tough for that offense to work well. Also, we'll have to do a pretty good job of defending the run with the lighter box. So we'll see how all that plays out. But I really love our opportunities. I love our odds versus Bama this season, just based off of what I saw in their spring game. But again, the biggest takeaway for me is just how different that team looks from top to bottom. It's nowhere near what it was before. So Alabama, I mean, they could maybe shock some teams just because it's kind of a different offensive look. But I would say that, they're going to go back to being a very average ball club. Maybe 2 to 3 losses a season is what we can expect. Maybe not this season, but, I would say moving forward. I mean, and they may end up losing that many this year as well. But for sure, they're going to go back to what they were before Nick Saban, as far as I'm concerned. And now for the last team that we'll be talking about that's on our schedule, that's going to be UGA. Now, first and foremost, y'all know that I can't stand Georgia, but I'm just going to keep it real with y'all, right? Like, I'm not going to, do like a homer take, any of that. Everything that I'm telling y'all is exactly what I actually saw. I think that Georgia might be, the best physically put together team that I've seen in a very long time. They look really good. It's going to be a team that, whenever they're getting off the bus, some players might say, oh man, like, I don't know if we want to play them. So that's going to be the biggest hurdle for us. Okay. And I would say for anyone that's playing Georgia is you've got to kind of get over that psyche of, man, they're big and they look strong. And, they're, were back-to-back national champions. They had a really good season last year. Only Alabama beat them. Once you get over that, and you go out there and you play ball with them, okay, if you're tough enough to kind of withstand those hits and, holding and all the stuff that they do, they're going to be very beatable this season. And the reason that I'm saying that is because they look like they've gained too much weight. And they're a step slow from the front, okay, to the second level, to the third level on offense, defense, special teams. They are a big, slower team. Reminds me a lot of a, like Big Ten type of a team. Now, they're not quite that slow, right? Like we kind of talked about this with Iowa last year, that we're going to kill them out in space. They're not as slow as like an Iowa, but I mean, they're not too far from it. I'm just telling y'all, go back and watch that game. If you think I'm just blowing smoke, watch them from top to bottom. They get exposed out in space. And one of the ways that I could really tell that was because all of the players that were getting open and that was making plays were the transfer guys that were, haven't spent a whole lot of time in their weight room and in their system. So, I kind of hate to say these things because, you hope that no Georgia fan or coach or player or anything like that gets wind of it and kind of goes to their strength staff and says, hey, we need to kind of tone it back some and try to work more on speed. Because I think that is how some teams will be able to beat Georgia, especially Tennessee, with the way that we're going to spread them out, things like that. Now, the biggest question is always going to be, can you block their front? And I think that we can. I was not very impressed with their front by any means. Not a whole lot of pass rush, but it wasn't a whole lot of pass rush for them last season either. So, we'll kind of see what happens with that, especially because they're going up against their offensive line, which looks stout. But again, on both sides, you're seeing some big, huge bodies that are going to be powerful at the point of contact, but they're slow. So I would say that, if we can just find a way to maybe, max protect and just, maybe double team some of those bigger bodies. If we feel like they're going to be overpowering us, that would be big, especially for Cooper Mays being a smaller center. We've seen that he kind of struggled with Georgia, not so much last year, but he did some. But the year before last, back in 22, he struggled trying to block those big boys a lot. But I think that if we can get around that, like once we figure that part of it out, if we can get them out in space, and we've got to also continue to kind of pound this point home across the entire country on social media, everywhere, wherever we can scream it at, we got to start screaming that, hey, we've got to stop Georgia secondary from holding and mugging people. Again, go back and watch their spring game. What you'll see is guys literally cutting off routes and hugging people, bear hugging people to stop it 7, 8, 9, 10 yards down the field. That is defensive holding. That's pass interference. It's something. Like, you can't just not call that. It didn't even get called in that game. So if we can get those calls, right, kind of similar to what we talked about with our basketball team and Zach Edey, if we're more vocal this time, if we can get those calls, I think that we'll blow Georgia out because their secondary players are huge, but they're slow as freaking Christmas. And, I think that we can most definitely put up a bunch of points out in space with those guys. Now, just talking about their offensive line, right? They are big, they're stout, but they're slow. I would like to see a lot more wide nine blitz from the outside and try to make Carson Beck step up into that pocket and deliver strikes down the field. I think that we can do that for sure because we've got a whole lot of speed on the edges, and they're going to have trouble, I think, blocking us on a consistent basis, especially if they're going to be passing as much as they showed in that spring game. I don't think that they will, though, because, Kirby Smart, Mike Bobo, old habits die hard. They're going to go back to what they always do, which is run the football, play action, dump it off to the daggum tight end. Like, that's what they're good for. That's what they like to do. But, yeah, there are some dynamic playmakers out there at wide receiver that are going to be wasted, as always. I think that Carson Beck is a guy that outside of the numbers on deep balls is not very accurate. In the middle of the field, he looks a lot more accurate, especially whenever he has time. So probably a game that you play, cover 3, cover 2, and, mix in some man, some different blitzes, things like that, just to kind of get him thrown off. But he's not nearly as, he's not the type of a playmaker that people are trying to make him out to be by any means. Again, if you think that I'm just blowing smoke, go back and watch that game, but watch the whole thing. You've got to see how he's performing throughout the entire game because they look pretty sharp early on, but as the game kind of wears on, you're seeing, and that also could be part of it, is that they're getting tired because they're a little bit overweight, and you can see that they just look, I don't want to say that they look average because, it's not quite that, but they just do not look like a team that is championship caliber. But we will talk about a team that, I would say is what we would think that Georgia should look like coming up here in just a minute. But I also just want to touch on Georgia's got this big running back, and I can't remember his name, but he's number 0. He's like 6 feet tall, 240 pounds. They said that he's the fastest running back inside of that room. I don't know how true that is. He's the perfect example of being big and running soft. Okay, he is big, and I don't think that there was any times where I'm seeing him trucking people or running through people. He's just like a big old soft marshmallow target. I think we'll have a field day with him if they want to put his big old butt out there. He's going to get lit up. Okay, we're talking about Keenan Pili. Okay, we're talking about Jeremiah T-Lander, who's real fired up for that game. Arion Carter, who we already know is going to be fired up too. Edwin Spillman, Caleb Perry, all those guys. And then, the safeties coming downhill because really all you got to do, those big bodies, hold them up. Let the safeties and the secondary players come on in and really, knock their block off. That's what I want to see. That's what I'm looking forward to see. But yeah, I would just say that from top to bottom, Georgia I think that they will lose at least 2 games this season. I sincerely do. Going up against a team, again, If you can block them, then, you can find those mismatches down the football field. All right. And I don't think that it's going to be that difficult to block them this year unless they bring some blitzes, things like that. So on to the next team, and that's going to be Auburn. Not a whole lot to talk about with them outside of the fact of I don't think that they're quite there yet. I think that they're going to lose several games this season. Coach Freeze has got to go out and get some more talent. The quarterback position just does not look good. Okay, they've got a couple of good playmakers on the outside. I think that they've got a true freshman wide receiver. He was impressive. I can't think of his name. It might be Cam something, whatever. But yeah, he looks pretty good. I think they call him Baby Megatron or something like that. But anyway, outside of that, yeah, not a whole lot to be impressed about. The defense just looks a little bit porous as well. It's kind of similar to an NC State, but on a higher level. Like they're kind of, I would say the NC State is almost like a poor man's Auburn on defense. Like that's what that NC State defense looks like. But yeah, I would say that it's not a whole lot to worry about for us. I don't think that we're going to be seeing them because I don't see them making it to the playoffs. Can they go out and upset some teams with that scheme that the Coach Freeze runs? Yeah, I mean, maybe they can. I think that they're going to take a step forward from last year, but they're still just, I would say, maybe another year or two away from us talking about them maybe even, considering competing for an SEC title, or for the playoffs. Now, the next team that I want to talk about is Clemson. We talked about them some. I think that they look better than I would have thought, just kind of like heading into their spring game. They kind of look more like the Clemson of old. I like their defense. We're seeing a lot more blitzes. They've got Coach Mickey Kahn, who we know pretty well on this channel from him coaching at Grayson. I believe he was Grayson High School's first head coach. For those of y'all who don't know about Grayson, it's a powerhouse. Okay, there's a lot of great players that came from Grayson, and most of them came from Mickey Kahn. I mean, he's just a really, really good coach. But yeah, I like the way that their defense looks so far. Just a whole lot of fast, physical, not a whole lot of thinking. It looks like he maybe kind of dumbed it down some for them. So watch out for that with them. I think that they've also got a problem at quarterback. The guy that they had that we played up against in the Orange Bowl back in 22. He's a junior or something like that now. I'm just not impressed with the way that he puts the ball into trouble all the time. And we're seeing that everywhere. Like wherever he goes, and it doesn't matter what the game situation is, he's going to put the ball in trouble. But yeah, the offensive line looks pretty, I wouldn't say bad, but I could see why, honestly speaking, David Sanders will be considering going there because he's for sure going to be able to start with that offensive line. But they've got some good playmakers on the outside as well. I think that they'll shock some people. I don't know what the over/under is on Clemson. I think it's like 8.5. I could see them going over that. I most definitely could. Again, it's really all going to be predicated off of their quarterback play and does he turn that football over, which I feel like he's going to, especially in those critical moments. So that's just what I saw from their spring game. Now, on to the last team that we'll be talking about, and that is Ohio State. Now, this is the team that I kind of talked about earlier on that reminds me of what, people think Georgia is because, they're loaded from top to bottom. They're very deep. They've got big players, but they've also got the playmakers that move well in space. And for a Big Ten team, you might not necessarily expect that. They've got a bunch of quarterbacks. I think that Will Howard can get it done, right? Just in their offensive scheme. Obviously, with Chip Kelly, it's going to be a whole lot of, quick screens, things like that. It's going to be a whole lot of, hey, the offensive line's going this way, but we're throwing the ball this way. So, people should have some room to run, and they've got some people who can go. That wide receiver room is very impressive. I'm just going to say this right now. If you don't know about Jeremiah Smith, who's a true freshman at wide receiver from South Florida, you need to get to know about him. He's the truth. He reminds me a lot of like a Julio Jones, but not Julio Jones when he was in college, Julio Jones when he was playing for the Falcons. Like, that's where he literally is at for me as a true freshman. And I hate to kind of blow him up, but I'm just telling you, he looks very, very special. That's just what I've seen personally. But I'm also hearing everyone gushing over him. And you can tell in the way that the coaches look when they're talking about him that he is the real deal. And he's going to be a big-time problem. But they've got several other wide receivers. We saw some crazy catches on the sidelines. I think that the offensive line looks stout, especially with that first group. Now, the second group saw some question marks. I know that their defensive line is really strong. They've got waves, a whole bunch of five-star players. And their secondary, we just talked about how good the wide receivers look. The secondary was in very tight coverage versus those wide receivers. So Yeah, I mean, they play it the way that Georgia wishes they were playing it, where you're actually playing good coverage without doing some unnecessary holding and stuff. Now, there's always going to be maybe a little bit of holding that isn't always seen, but the way that Georgia does it, that's mugging people. That's obvious. The way that the Buckeyes are doing it, it's not nearly as obvious. So whenever you're talking about a national title run, to me, I would say that they are the best teams that I've seen so far, just in terms of a spring game. But that's going to be it for this video. Those are just my thoughts on the spring games. We'll have some more, okay, just to kind of come out as I watch more and more of these games, especially with teams that are on our schedules. I'll probably be watching those first. But please let me know what y'all think. If y'all seen any spring games, things like that, I would love to hear y'all's feedback. And thank y'all so much for sticking all the way to the end. Please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your friends, family, and other volunteer fans. And we'll see y'all on the next one. Thanks. Peace.